Now, this is a provocative opener. Some years ago, a curator, producer, described you to me as famously irate. And
I want to know later offline who this was.
I mean, we this person, I'm sure we both know who that person is. Was it last year's Live Artery? Um, I'm trying to remember. As a preface to a showing of the new work, you said, "I have run out of things to protest." Now, this is maybe that's a paraphrase, as
I
poor
think it was I've run out
paraphrase.
of things to reject. I definitely
Uh,
haven't run out of things to protest, but I think I said I've run out of things to reject.
to reject. Uh, so I guess you just answered. Is this inaccurate memory? What of irateness? And is there a new, less combative Miguel Gutierrez?
It's such a great question. I love this question. Thank you. It's such a good opener too. I love it. We're going right to the heart of the matter. I do fear that I've become famously cranky. Um, uh, I mean, there's different registers of it for me. I think a lot of my crankiness is about the professional components of the field and the kinds of administrative, financial, structural um, inequities and difficulties and things that don't really ever seem to change, at least in the time that I've been in the field. And, obviously, I imagine you have a different perspective on this as well. And for better and sometimes probably for worse, I am a person who just opens his mouth and speaks. And I have a sort of like I think this comes from my dad, who is no longer with us, but he was very much a, a person very involved, very invested in the idea of justice. He wasn't like a public, activist or anything sort of major in a public sense, but he had an incredibly clear compass of what he felt was right and what he felt was wrong, and he was not afraid to say it. And
Mm,
and in most contexts, and he was the kind of person who, when he spoke in the room, people listened, and everyone in the family was like, "Well, what does he have to say?" His name was also Miguel, and so I think, particularly even maybe since his passing in 2019, I feel almost like charged to carry that forward,
mm,
and that kind of like fearlessness. I don't know if that's entirely the right word, because I don't think I'm necessarily being so brave. um
mm,
but I just hate when propriety and professionalism uh create filters to prevent us from speaking about things truthfully or complicatedly. Um, and that happens a lot. The art world is in the world, and that happens in
mm,
the
mm,
world. We're not you know, exempt from that kind of behavior. And I do think sometimes there's a kind of romantic narrative placed around art and dance making where it's like, oh, this thing, it's a labor of love. And here's where we find the this and the that and the beauty and the truth. And like, yes, that can be absolutely true. And it can also be a place where we perpetuate the same systems of inequity and ignorance that are present outside the studio and off the stage. Um,
mm,
so we're not like off the hook, is how I feel. And so, particularly as it relates to power and the dissemination of power and gatekeeping, those are things that I speak up a lot about. Now, earlier in my career, I would say probably another component of that was like form and what is considered experimental, what is considered mainstream, what lane you're assigned in, if you're a racialized artist or an artist of a certain ethnicity or identity, how that sometimes also is meant to track you into certain aesthetic choices, and when you don't fulfill those aesthetic choices, uh how you are perceived or how you are then sort of like said, oh, you're weird. Okay, weird is over here, this is over here.
mm,
And I find that so boring, and uninteresting, and like a way of keeping things apart, and a way of like again reifying very boring normative standards. Um
Well,
when
this is a very, very generous answer. And excuse me if I keep oscillating back into anecdote, but I do remember when we had our first conversation about you accepting the resident commission artist program, I was feeling out. I believe it was, well, we were still in the throes of the, what do you want to call what happened with George Floyd? What happened with this great soul searching and everyone
yeah.
putting it on the middle of the streets, black light, so on and so forth. And I said to you, trying to understand who our next artist would be, and I said, are you Latinx? And
Mhm.
you, or something, you said, well, in a kind of Miguel way, you said it almost under your breath. Well, yes, I am, but I feel that's a minoritarian point of view.
Mm.
And that
Yeah.
term, I'd not heard that term used that way,
Yeah.
minoritarian. It was almost as if it was, maybe you just defined what you think is the problem with a minoritarian embrace on the part of a working artist or a working thinker, I suppose.
Yeah, but I think for me that has to do with the ways in which, again, how a presumption or assumption of what someone's I don't often feel that when people lead with like my identity is blank 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 blank, or like in bios now is a blah blah blah. I read
Mm-hmm.
that like that doesn't tell me anything about your work. It tells you about you, sure, and that's not important. That's not unimportant to me. And, as a queer Latinx person, I definitely have always sort of sought out other queer people of color, Latinx people, like people, like I would say that that's been interest of mine, and just an affinity that I feel. Uh,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I know I'm gonna more likely feel at home in those contexts, right? But it doesn't define what the work is going to do or be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It may speak to aspects of why the work is a certain way, but even then, to sort of presume that there's going to be a one-to-one relationship. I have a really strong memory of watching a documentary that you're in, and maybe I'm going to paraphrase, and you were like, they're talking about your time that you came to New York, and you're like, I didn't want to be finished by Ailey, right? This, which I loved that and finishing in the sense of like formed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that was so huge for me when I heard you say that
Mm-hmm.
because I could imagine, again, please, correct me if I'm wrong, that for you at the time that you came to New York, that was the lane, right? If you were African American
Mm-hmm.
artist, that was considered sort of like the gold standard in a
But
way.
it was problematic or problematized by the fact that my companion who made
Yes.
this was a white Jewish Italian
Yeah.
man.
No, and I think I'm sure that that was a factor, right? Because you were kind of and that you were openly queer, right? And
Mm-hmm.
that had never been a kind of like I don't, as far as I can tell, had never been like a disguise, and 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 so of course that shaped your interest and also the trajectory you came through and how you came into dance and what the physical explorations that you were doing early on in your training. I just think that that led you to another path. I'm not saying better or worse. I'm not,
No,
but
I
I'm saying
agree.
I'm saying that you said, "Oh, but also this is blackness or this can also
Mm-hmm.
be," right? And so I feel similarly in that, my models for what a Latinx artist is meant to do in dance did not always align with the interests I had formerly and the legacies that I came through and the training that I came through. Now, I want to say, even since that conversation, uh, I keep learning more and more, right, about South American abstraction, Latin American artists, artists of color in general, like how sort of again this binary between the idea that experimentation belongs to whiteness is just
Mm.
false, right? And it's not just false, it's just like really, really wrong. and
Mm-hmm.
and that somehow I even wrote an essay, right? Does abstraction belong to white people? And that had a lot to do with this question for me of like, and that was more to do with the idea of abstraction as violence, not so much even just the idea of abstraction in art. But I've just come to learn more and more in the last like 5 to 10 years about like how all the different histories that exist of experimentation and abstraction and pushing at form in non-white contexts or
Mhm.
non-hero.
But you know, even what you're saying right now would be kind of probably Miguel 20 years ago, or the world that Miguel was in, it would have been considered. Well, I shouldn't say it would have been, but I know it would happen to me as people were saying, "Well, Bill, why? You know, you're cool. You know, you're not like living in a ghetto somewhere. You're here with us, and we're cool. So why do you want to sort of define yourself as black?" I said, "Well, I am black."
Yeah.
And they said, "But that means nothing." And when they said that means nothing, that is when the conversation uh, starts, because it sounds like you've got to school them, and then it's
Yeah.
them and us. And I was dropping acid at Woodstock. I was like
Yeah.
the new world and so on and so forth. And Arnie and I were members of a collective of
Yeah.
choreographers, primarily white middle class kids. But that gave me a lot of. So you're right. When I took a stance, and I think maybe one reason I've always been excited about you, because, and thank you for the autobiographical, you did seem by naturally to take a stance, to take a position, which makes me very interested in this work, which is called Super Nothing,
Yeah.
right? Do you want to talk about that title, or
Yeah. Yeah.
it sounds like a provocative Miguel title?
Um, yeah, we got going with the piece in last year, and I was banding about several titles. Sometimes a piece starts with a title, right? And sometimes the title
Mm-hmm.
comes later, as I'm sure you know. Um, and I had a couple different ideas. I was like had this document, and was writing it down, different ideas, and I can't remember the aha moment, but I think I understood that there was something epic and empty that I was interested in, or
Mm-hmm.
epic and infinitesimal, um, in the way that a dance, a life, a person, in the grand scheme of the universe, or even like the history of the last 100 years, or however many, whatever sort of time frame you want to put on it, is a blip, is a little blip. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I am no yeah, I'm not even if my work has impact, even if I'm lucky enough as I have been to have a profile as a person who does what I do, that's still so tiny. And
Mm-hmm.
yet for me, it is like not only life-saving, right? Making work for me is a life-saving gesture. Um,
I'm
and
sorry. How is that? How so?
Oh, a reason for being. It's a
Mm-hmm.
reason to get out of bed. It's a reason to go to work. I try to schedule my life by creating a series of things I just have to show up for. So I can't
Mm-hmm.
succumb to my depression, forgive the phrasing, but suicidal ideations, or, like despair that
Mm-hmm.
can quite easily consume me, because there's a lot to be sad about, and there's a lot to be
Mm-hmm.
overwhelmed by all the time, right? Right now, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, it's like pick any point in history, there's a reason to be upset. And for me, art making, dance making, song making, writing, teaching are all sort of like calls to presence, like calls to me to be in connection to community. And that's also how I define my spiritual practice, is being in community with others or connecting to others, um, and showing up for them. And so that's the thing is like, it's big and it's tiny. It's big and it's tiny. It's monumental to me. It is like everything to me. It made me nothing. And I think the dance world in general always has this kind of tension around its like own belief system in itself, particularly
Mm-hmm.
American modern dance landscape, or American dance landscape, partly because capital is so hard to come by, and capital sort of as recognition or as worth, which is like the equation in capitalism, is so not really part of the conversation with dance, that like we have to generate our own sense of importance. Um, And so for me, this is this kind of like big little thing.
But now, just for a moment, now just to be clear about terms, when you say the community of dancers, I mean, I think that people who I just came back from the as being a guest at the Kennedy Center Honors, and meeting people who say, "Oh, you do dance? Well, have you seen Wicked? Have you seen what Broadway shows have you seen and whatever?"
You're like, I
They
directed
so
one. Thank you very much.
so they think that so there are people that dance is um, a profession that if you play your cards right, you can make a living.
Sure.
And I think that maybe that's what I'm getting at right now. That you said that dance saved your life, and I think that's quite profound. But as I said to a young dude 2 weeks ago, we had a talk back with Anna DeVere Smith at NYU, and all the students were like coming forward with their what they want to do, their aspirations, and why it's so hard. And this young guy, the guys waited till the end. A lot of them did, but he was a filmmaker, young white guy, and he said, "Well, what do you think about? I made my film now. I don't really know what to do, if what to get it, how to get it out there, if I should, and so on." And I said, trying to really present time him. I said, "Well, what's the relationship between your film and your feeding yourself?"
Mhm.
Now that's another thing that they don't teach us in the hallowed halls of culture, is that artists, yes, they are poets, but they also are a workforce, and they've
100%.
got to
Yeah.
participate, whether they will or no,
Yeah.
in this world. So how does that work? The idea that your work actually, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe your work, you're a teacher, you're a podcaster, maybe your work is not connected to the matrix of feeding you or clothing you or housing you.
It is. I mean, I think I made a very conscious decision. It was in around 2000, 2001, around that time. Like many people, I worked in restaurants, I worked in cafes, I had other kinds of work for years. And while at that point I was already dancing, I had already danced professionally in San Francisco with Joe Good. I had danced professionally in New York with John Jaspers, and those were great opportunities and great experiences for me. And I was paid in those places, and I was paid decently, for when we were working and responsibly. Like the both of those artists were very responsible managers. Um, but I still had to do all this extra work, right, to sort of live. And I had an experience of working with John as an assistant on a couple projects that he made for other people. And I remember thinking, I am here as an assistant. These people are going to get to perform this after I'm gone, and I have to go back to my restaurant job. Wait, that does not compute. And so I made a decision that I would try to, you know, make my entire living from dance and art stuff, right? Now, mind you, I was living in a loft that cost me about $375 a month in Bushwick. And I was choosing to ignore my student loan debt, which was
Mm-hmm.
not advisable. And I don't recommend anybody who's out there listening, but it was my own, trip of like financial irresponsibility or malfeasance that allowed me to choose this path. But and that's when I started teaching a lot more regularly, and that's when I was through teaching, I started getting other kinds of opportunities and gigs, and that's when I decided to really focus on my work, and I self-produced my first big show, and then I started getting presented. My first time being presented was actually at Splitstream at the old DTW. So it was like, but it was a paradigm shift I had to make with myself. I had to say, like, I have to believe that this thing that I care more about anything else in the world can be the source. Now, I don't know if that's possible now for people to go as simple as making a decision and then poof, it happens. And it wasn't as simple as that. I still had other jobs for many more years, right? Um, but it was connected to me to that. And then when I started having working with managers, that was part of the conversation. It was like sitting down and mapping out the year and making a financial plan of like, okay, if you want to get paid in October, you better teach in September, right? It's like being able to look at a thing and not being afraid of numbers and not being afraid of of maybe the kind of more pragmatic realities and the things that are maybe less sexy or like, just me sitting in the corner being waiting to be inspired kind of shit. It's like, no, no, no,
Hmm.
you gotta like work.
Hmm.
I'm not, and I never have been afraid to work. So
Hmm.
that's not never been the issue. I think the thing that comes up to go back kind of to the opening question is like sometimes I see that and in our field, what's really frustrating is that there is no there's no ladder. It's
Hmm.
like you're expected 20 years into your career to get to receive the same fees that you got at the beginning sometimes. And it's like,
Hmm.
oh, who's gonna keep track of this if not me, right? And that really drives me crazy is that within the field itself, we don't have HR, we don't have like anyone we can turn to in that regard to be like, this is not cool, this is not fair, or this is, can we have a conversation about this? And so we are a bit subject to the not the whims because I know every venue, every institution has their own parameters and realities that they have to attend to, but we are a little bit subject to the whims of other people's like a capacity for feeding us, you know.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah,
can't
yeah,
just
yeah.
walk up to a venue and say like, "Give me a show." Like I kind of have to wait to be invited. It has to be a whole song and dance, and so it's a tricky thing.
Well, I hear myself say it more times than I'd like to admit, but saying to young, hungry artists, I think they're hungry. I'm asking them, well, a couple of things. What do you think success is?
Mm.
And why do you think that if a person is choosing on a Friday night to go see the latest blockbuster or to go out and to a bar and maybe get laid or whatever, why should they choose coming to your sending 2 hours with you in this show? In other
Mhm.
words, as I said to Wally Cardona, and I think it was a very important moment for us to say, I said, well, do you have I use the word contract with the audience.
Mhm.
And he said, that's very, very harsh. And I think I know what he means, but is there something, should they expect something from you? Or is art something like going to church and they should go there and fall under your sway? Or should they go there and expect something, an exchange?
I think it's a little kind of a both and thing for me. I think because, I've been making work for a while, so there are people who have a familiarity with the work and have been following my work. And my work, I think the thing about my work is that it's not always quite the same thing from show to show. There might be a similar tone and a kind of energetic, throughout the chord of my work, but I very actively try to challenge myself. And whenever I make a dance or a piece, I try to forget how I made the previous one. I see how I can approach this and see, well, what is it that it needs to say now? And also, I work project to project, so I'm usually working with different groups of people every time, which elicits a very different alchemy in the room each time. Um, so there are going to be people who come who have that archive a bit or who like have heard about the archive a little bit, right? Like there's like, some information they can look up. And there's going to be people who are brand new to it. I definitely feel like the audience has to do work. Like you come and you have to do some work. It's perceptual work. Ultimately I traffic in the medium of attention. So that's a two, I don't want to say contract per se, but like there's a kind of agreement, like an LOA, let's say, rather
Mhm.
than a contract. So and I assume that if you came to see like a weirdo dance in an experimental venue, that you are a person who is willing to do that work, right? Like my favorite task quote on this is Jerzy Grotowski in Towards a Poor Theater talking about how we are here for the person who wants to have a spiritual encounter with themselves, and that doesn't matter whether it's the janitor or the professor. Like it's not tied to class or profession. It's like who's willing. And for me, that's all I care about, that there's willingness. That's not the same as they have to enjoy it, they have to like it, they have to come away and understanding it. There's willingness and that those things come after.
Mhm.
And if the person can be in a place to be given permission, and that's a lot of what I do when I do audience reaction kind of conversations. A lot of I feel like the work I'm doing is just like giving the person permission to have a feeling.
Mhm.
and be like, you have a feeling about every song on your Spotify playlist. You have a feeling about every stupid movie that comes on your Netflix queue. You have a feeling about the clothes you wear in the morning. Guess what? You get to have a feeling about this dance too. Like
Mm,
you have all the skills you need to discern and assess. Now, that's different than the knowledge you might need or want in order to truly analyze and criticize. That's time. That's an investment that you will have to make as an audience member, right? I never studied painting, but I came to know painting because I love museums and I love going to museums and I love looking at painting. So over 20 plus years of looking at painting, I know a thing or two about painting now. Again, never formally studied it. But that's like Jeanette Winterson says the same thing in Art and Mind, right? She's like, she's really harsh about it. She's talking about like how people need to like sit in front of a painting for an hour to even begin to understand it. It's a little bit ridiculous, I think. But she's like to the audience, you who have done nothing, like she's really intense about it, right? And
mm,
I don't go that far, but I think that there's a sense of like the idea that you're going to sit there and be like, show me, that's not it. That's not it. If you want that, go to something else, 100%.
mhm,
But
mhm,
if you're willing to be like, oh, I like this, I hate this, I don't understand it, like if you're willing to kind of do this with yourself, then my work is the right space. And so,
mhm.
and I will offer you the generosity of all the freaking time I put into making this thing, all the consideration I've gone through to think about how I want this to be experienced, right? I have no control over what you will feel. I don't pretend to, and if I did, I'd be doing Hollywood films, which I may want to do someday. But I will do everything to make sure that this thing can be experienced as closely as to the way that I would want for you to experience it.
Right. You are quoted as saying you use attention as a material form and as a means to unravel normative belief systems.
Yeah.
What is attention?
Yeah.
And what do you mean by attention as the material form?
Yeah. Well, I think attention is our capacity to be with, right? It's our a capacity to sort of notice and be with, and to maybe distinguish from judgment or criticism or immediate affirmation. It's just being with the thing. And so, as an educator, part of what I'm assessing with students is like, was this student with me? Like, were they willing to be here and with it? And, a lot of times when you're an educator, you're offering information that is not understood at first. So is this person willing to engage in that? Right? Are they then also willing to notice within themselves those moments of sort of like stoppage or and then are they going to be like, hey, what did you mean when you said, what's this kind of dialogue that starts to form? So that's kind of what I mean by attention. And in terms of,
Because I think that is seems to be part of the very language of the piece. But one more question: could you give me an example of what you mean by a normative belief system?
I mean, I think it's normative belief system is that we see something and we judge it and we know.
Mm-hmm.
I think dance, what I like to do with dance and why I'm working in a time-based medium is that hopefully the experience in the theater or wherever you're experiencing the work, this particular case with Super Nothing, it is in the theater. I think it's interesting when the alleged tethers of reality get to come undone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that dance can do effectively, almost better than any other medium. I think sound obviously does it really beautifully and sensually. Um, Visual art can do it, of course, as well, but sometimes visual art, you feel like you can see it and go. I think like having to go and pay the ticket and go and sit in the seat and like be with the thing and the code of the theater can actually be a laboratory of attention where you suddenly confront, oh, am I what I think I am? Is that person who I think they are? Is what they're doing the same as what I'm feeling? Wait, how is it that I'm feeling this thing? Was it because of it's not as simple as like, oh, I did a move and then the person had a feeling. That's not
Mm-hmm.
what I'm doing with choreography.
It
Um,
can be. It can be, of course.
it
Some
can
people
be,
want. Some people want to go and see, as Martha Graham says, acrobats of God.
hundred
They want to
percent.
go. They want to go see people do things that they can't do. Or
Yes,
yeah.
that's and I don't think that like a lot of what the dancers are doing in this piece are things that like everybody can necessarily do, but that's not the point. The point is kind of like the 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 dance is a conduit to feeling, and it's a conduit to feeling in both its specificness and in its aggregate nature.
Hmm.
It's how it connects and how it passes through time, right? There's a reason this happens now, and then this happens, and then this goes for longer, and then this is shorter, and then this is louder, and this is quieter, and this is softer, and this is harder. Like it's the aggregation of sensations and feelings that lead you to sort of untether yourself from a kind of constant sense of forward moving understanding of the world.
You
I
know,
think
I
that
have,
I can.
I say this so much, I'm getting sick of hearing myself say it, but I think it's useful. Um, our Duchamp said that he believed that art was primarily an intellectual activity.
Mhm.
Now you're using the word, and I love the way you use it, using a conduit for feeling.
Yeah.
Well, think of our elders, for instance. Was Merce Cunningham making a conduit for feeling? Was Trisha making a conduit for feeling? Was These are my favorites, formal choreographers,
Sure.
George Balanchine, what have you. What do you think about those that tradition that we've inherited? What was your relationship to like Cunningham or
Oh, I love that shit. I mean, I felt a lot. You know, like I with Cunningham, I was a huge Cunningham fan for years. I dated Cunningham members, you know, like so I had a real in. Same with Trisha Brown, I'll say. Um, I mean, I felt a lot watching it. I don't care if they didn't think they were crazy. I mean, I know that there was this whole sort of like, you know, discourse uh around kind of like not manipulating people's reactions and all this whole thing. I get it, you know, and that feels like a little, it's very white to me, that history of that kind of conversation.
Mhm.
And I'm like, no, I felt a lot. Like I felt so much watching Merce's work and Trisha's work, and those are two very different artists, very different kinds of movement, very different kinds of aesthetic drivers, and very different kinds of performers, even. And also, I was very fascinated again because it's just the way my mind works in what happens when the individual idiosyncratic artist sort of then forms companies and like what happens in the company model versus the individual and kind of then when there's generations of companies, how we start to get in conversations around like, oh, well, I remember when the company looked like this, or this so and so people were in it, and how it created a certain imprimatur of the work, and then how that changes over time. So those are all things that like fascinate me about those kinds of artists. But yeah, I felt a lot. I mean,
Mhm.
I remember with Merce, I would be like, I remember seeing a show of Merce's in the aughts at EDF, and people were like walking out, and I was like, this motherfucker, like he can still get people to walk out of a theater. You're like, you know, mostly because of the music is like, you know, like crazy
Mhm.
sound. But you know, I don't know. I was just like, wow, he's just doing his weirdness. I don't want to see anyone else do this. I don't want to see anyone else try to do Merce Cunningham besides Merce
Mhm.
Cunningham. Like besides, you know, like I don't need to see any other artist ape this. Like the
Yeah, but aren't the ideas that we're talking about, the ideas of indeterminacy, the multi-directionalism, non-psychologically driven those
Yeah, but a
things.
lot of that was bullshit. He had lovers in the company that there's dancers that where he's like next to his lover the whole time in the piece. And that's not an accident or chance
I'm not
process.
sure. Say that again. I'm like, what was this again?
Oh, I know, I have some intel. You know, like let's just say it wasn't always that unemotionally driven. You know,
Mm.
I think, and I also think in general that concept of like somehow that an algorithm is unemotional is not true. Algorithm is a human created thing, and so there are
Hmm.
biases, there are preferences, and I'm sorry, dynamics were in the room. You know, if there had truly been an algorithm of chance, then the gender presentation in a Cunningham piece would be a lot different than it is.
No, I mean, I've said that to Chris Komar once and to others. Well, if it is all by chance, why do we so seldom see two men dancing together?
Yeah, or why we see
But I
those.
had heard Merce say he did not do that because it's about choices, because it would detract the audience's attention away from the business of the dancing if they were concerned with these two guys having sex together. I guess, and you don't buy that.
No, I mean, I buy that it's true that I buy that that's the construct that he understood and grew up in. That makes, I get, right? This idea that somehow same-sex desire is a distraction from
Mm-hmm.
what? Like, and here I am, here is exactly what I'm saying, normative belief systems, right?
Mm-hmm.
And whereas in so many ways he was able to crack open time and crack open perception in such incredibly weird ass ways, he was still the subject of who he is. Like he's
Mm-hmm.
still who he is. Like he doesn't escape his own time, his own context, his own, racialized background, gendered background. Like, those are all at play in the work. There's no sort of outside of that Cunningham is. Like Cunningham is still embedded in its own
Mm-hmm.
racialized, gendered logic. I'm
Would
sorry.
you say we all are?
100%. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not a insult to say it. I don't think of it as a weakness. I think it's limitation because
Mm-hmm.
perception is limitation and subjectivity is both point of view and it's also limitation to the point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we need to be like in conversation. If it was just one person, this is why the master model of the 20th century modern dance thing uh, is no longer useful to us because we can't just have individual figures only. We have to be in conversation. We have
So
to
you
be.
don't believe in the individual genius?
I think it's really overplayed. I
Mm.
think I think it's I don't think anyone makes their work in isolation. I think everyone's building on what's come before and is everyone is a beneficiary of other people's work.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's not to say that an individual couldn't be a catalyst that's really particular. And I know that like I think with my own work, if I'm not in the room when it's made or generated, I don't really feel like it is my work
Mm-hmm.
anymore. Um, and it's not because I'm so special, but because yeah, my work is me. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's not just the moves, it's the gestalt of me. It's the whole mess of me. So that to me is different though than like the individual genius model. I feel like that just feels a little archaic to me.
Well, it's certainly our era is telling us this. Referring back again to that press release, and I'm asking, what do you mean by an empathic and irreverent space?
Yeah. Well, I like I said, I'm into feeling. So, um, I think empathy, and being empathic is about being willing to kind of uh like through Avatar go through a sense of feeling, right? To conjecture what others may feel, not because but because you understand that the realm of feeling is broader than your own subjective experience, right?
Mm.
And so empathy invites us into conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not replacement, not presumption, conversation. And irreverence for me is, like I said earlier, I am a person who, once I see what the rules are of a situation, or once I see kind of what's holding up a thing, I'm kind of like, I like to be like, does it have to be that way? Right. And again, I'm not the first person to think that way, and I'm not even the most radical version of that by any stretch of the imagination. But I think sometimes it amazes me how I'll be in I mean, earlier in my career, I'd be in certain situations and I'd be like, and why does that have to be like that? Or why, like, oh, we can't have
Mm-hmm.
the light on because it's not the right idea to have a certain light on, or we can't play that kind of music because of this, or we can't be naked because of,
Mm-hmm.
like, again, these are all things I'm sure you've thought about a million times and people before us thought about. Like, I just, but it's interesting how hegemony reifies itself generation after generation. Like
Mm.
we're seeing that now, right? White supremacy. It's like, well, she isn't dead yet. Like what? Like it's like it's like holding on and then like climbing back up, right? And it's kind of like you have to be irreverent. You have to sort of, if reverence means upholding something and not questioning it, then irreverence is looking at it and being like, and why are you not worthy of questioning? You know, and
Right.
and like, why are you so removed, or why are you so godlike that we don't get to ask you? And you can be respectful and irreverent at the same time. And I know that from being a queer person, right? It's like we love the read. We love the person who can read.
Mm.
And in the read, there's like taking you down maybe, but also it's like I give a shit enough about you to even read you, you know?
If you even think about it, yeah,
Because
yeah.
if I didn't care,
I was
you
going to ask
wouldn't.
you, what part does your audience play in these spaces that you create?
I mean, they form they close the circuit, you know? It's like the thing without the audience, um, it would just be, I don't know, it would just be rehearsal.
Mm.
But they invite the performers, they invite us. If I'm in it, I'm not in this piece, but when I am, they are the ones who are bearing witness to the call of attention. And through that, they sometimes allow us to access aspects of ourselves and ways of being that are quite out of the ordinary. Um, you know, if the dance is virtuosic or going for that kind of thing, or if it's like it has a certain kind of emotional rawness or depth or something, or there's a certain kind of sensual texture that's very particular, the audience's presence can sometimes be this like amazing energetic container for that and kind of like lifts it, right?
Mm.
It can also squash it, which
Yeah.
is scary. That's
So the
real
audience is important as an important component for you.
huge.
Super Nothing presents performers. Quote. This is a quote.
Yeah.
Presents performers whose actions and choreographic relationships are analogs for how people support each other to survive.
Yeah.
So that's a pretty grand statement. In other words, what goes on in these rooms where we make this thing called contemporary dance, if you will, or embodied investigation, you see that as an analogy to the world.
Absolutely. Well, not even just as simple as an analogy, but like I think that often what's happening in studios shows us that the world we wish for already does exist. There's a sense sometimes in studio and in practice and creation of cooperation, of coordination, of negotiation, of joy, of like admission, of pain, of sensitivity, of vulnerability, of anger, you know, all kinds of things that are the best uh, that we can offer of ourselves, right? And I think that's one of the things that I love about what I do, and that I love, you know, that I think it's, you know, is different than maybe a certain kind of different work setting where you couldn't necessarily bring all that
Mm-hmm.
of
Mm-hmm.
yourself. You wouldn't be invited to it because also it wouldn't be able to be held in the same kind of way. I'm not saying every studio practice has that, and I'm not saying every choreographic practice can. So I'm sure there are people who
Can or should.
probably both, depending on who's running it. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
like I know the limitations of what I can hold. Um, and that has become clear to me at different times. So, you know, there's been times when there's interpersonal stuff, and then I'm like, this is above my pay grade. Like, I need
Mm-hmm.
to bring in someone else to help me with this mediation, or you know, something like that. But I first give it a really good try on my own with the
Mm-hmm.
that I have. But the point is that again, we're not outside of the world. We have to deal with the reality of the interpersonal dynamics that are present in the outside world in the inside of the studio. But the studio, because we're all working towards a certain common goal, it can elicit from us a different kind of way of being, right? That it elicits a certain kind of attention. Again, like
Mm-hmm.
attention for me can be equivalent to care and to love. That's what defines it, is that you're giving this attention, you're being with, you know, which is why even running a rehearsal when you're not dancing in it can be so exhausting because you've
Mm-hmm.
been holding your attention, you've been holding the space, you've been kind of caring for the room for however many hours of that day. And then when that's over, you're like, oh, you know, it's like,
Yeah, right, right.
yeah.
Uh, so, uh, so Super Nothing is a piece that instructs or it demonstrates.
Oh, that's interesting. Maybe both. I don't know. Instructs feels very like I don't think it's pedantic, but I think it I mean, I think any dance at its best is teaching you how to experience it. Like holds within it, it's kind of like it's like rule book or it's like, like instruction pamphlet is kind of like
Mhm.
woven into the piece somehow. Um, sometimes you see a piece and you're like, people will be like, oh, why I didn't feel this about it. I'm like, that's not what the piece was offering. Like,
When a person says, I don't know, man, I didn't get it.
that's okay. But to me, I'd just be like, first of all, what did you not get? Like, what were you going to try to get?
Mm.
What is this acquisition mode of thinking? That's the first thing I would say. Like, release yourself from the uh, acquisition. Second, you did. Let's
I did.
start asking them questions. Well, you were there, so start asking them questions. Okay, well, what did you feel? What
Hmm.
was something that impressed itself to you? What's a question you have? What was confusing to you?
Hmm.
Who were you drawn to in the piece? How are you feeling right now? Uh,
Hmm.
do you have a memory of another time you felt that way? Like it doesn't take much for people to start to realize they actually know more than they realize.
Well, I sometimes say to such nervous audiences, just relax and watch yourself watching.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and make note of why am I getting upset right now? Why is my attention wandering? What's turning me on? What is frightening me? So I think you and I probably share that. Um, do you feel the studio process is an analogy for? Well, maybe you've already answered that. I was going to say an analogy for social behavior. Uh,
yeah, totally.
yes. Okay. You're invited to spend time. I understand in the process you were invited to spend time with years worth of rehearsal footage.
Yeah.
What was that like, and what did you find?
A lot of things. It was very strange. It's so hard, I don't know how you feel about this, Bill, but when I look at myself on video, I'm like, I guess that's me. Like, I guess they say it's me, so I guess I have to believe them. It's so strange to turn your like personal experience into like 2D reflection. So I think there's always that sense of alienation.
So they
Um,
were primarily you rehearsing solo.
no, 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 no. It was all kinds of stuff because this was all stuff from residency footage from Mansi, the Maggie Alsey National Center for Choreography, right, which is down at FSU, National Choreographic Center, and as part of their mandate, they've always had a video person on site who records rehearsals, records interviews with the collaborators. So it's all kinds of stuff. There was times I was developing a solo, but for the vast majority of my time there, I've often been making group works. So a lot of what I notice is like the little throwaway things and the kind of like the like energies in the room or the kind of like little side glances or me kind of like using a lot of words to not say a lot or how my nervousness would like mask my desire. Um
Is there text in this work?
in this work, I'm not sure yet. There's no text spoken by the performers. There may
Hmm.
be text in the soundtrack.
How did you work with your collaborator? Who sounds like a very powerful Puerto Rican born person. What did you what and you
I'm not Puerto Rican. Puerto Rican.
no
I'm
but your
oh
collaborator
oh no the oh well that's the composer. But I don't
composer.
think
So
Rosanna is born in Puerto Rico. No, the collaborators are there's Evelyn Sanchez Narvaez, Jay Carlon, um, Justin Faircloth, and Wendell Gray, and then my composer is Rosanna Caban, who's Puerto Rican. I don't know if she's born there or not. And then Carolina Ortiz is a lighting designer who is Mexican American. Um, and Jeremy Wood is a costume designer, and Stephanie Acosta is the dramaturg. So lots of different.
so how did it work? You said, oh well, look guys, this is the idea I have, and or did you say I want this and this? How do you work as the director with a group of strong
Usually,
collaborators?
when I start, I usually like guide people through a lot of improvisation. And then I just talk a lot about what I'm thinking about. I share what I'm going, like what is coming up for me. Um, and this part, when I very first started, I had already been keeping a little bit of a journal for the piece. So I shared some of that with the collaborators. We watch a lot of like stuff that becomes kind of reference text sometimes for the work. Like I think with this we watched Ralph Lemon's How Can You Stay in the House All Day and Not Go Anywhere? And we watched what is often a source text for me, which is Neil Greenberg's Not About AIDS Dance. Um, talking a lot about like what is the dance doing in these pieces and how that one piece of Ralph's is like so suffused with grief, and as is Neil's piece, but in Neil's piece, this contrast between like the sort of subtext and the overtext or something, right? The dance kind of being the overtext, actually. So we're establishing kind of like references, um and then we look at the footage. I pulled some of the footage from the archive that I've been looking at, and sometimes it was things that I was like, I want to reconstruct this, like this didn't end up in the piece, or this didn't end up in the piece the way that way. I want to
Mhm.
like try to rebuild this, and now let's do this to it, or let's think, like we start to manipulate that, and then that kind of led into all manners of conversation. So though it started from archive, it's not, the dance is not a reconstruction of a
No, I didn't think so.
yeah.
Looking at the reel, the promo reel is
Mhm.
a very handsome group. Um, First of all, did you know that that you wanted it to be dealing with? Well, how did you choose those bodies, if that's the way to put it? Why? How
Yeah,
did that happen?
I mean, for me, it's like who there's like people just start to occupy your imagination,
Mm,
and you see them, and you're like something. I've been seeing them. I'm like, I want to be in the room with that person. So
mhm.
Justin was probably the person. Justin and Evelyn, I've known maybe the longest. Justin, I saw in Jesse Young's work like years ago, actually at Nyla. Um, uh, and I was like, oh wow, I love how that person moves. And oh sorry, it's fine. And uh Evelyn, I saw do a performance at Gibney, and then Evelyn was in my piece, This Bridge Called My Ass. And that was a really fruitful process for me to work with Evelyn. Wendell, I saw in a Terry O'Connor work, and I just loved how what like the performative way that Wendell was in that work riveted me. And then Jay Carlon, who came in later the process, because we started first with another performer, Ajani Branham, and then Ajani left the process, and then Jay Carlon. Jay is also someone I've known for years, and I had just seen him in a piece of Lionel Popkins at Red Cat in LA, and I was like, oh, I love Jay is like just like a
Mhm.
beast, just a fire. So like it's just the desire to be in the room with these people and then to see how they work with each other, and then I just like, oh yeah, the alchemy between this group is really
Many of them, they do seem to be people of color.
well, yes, they are.
Yeah. And are they all queer people?
I don't want to speak for them, but I would say probably yeah.
Right. I was wondering, because what there's something you're getting at about the
Yeah.
truth or veracity of real experience. So you can have a person who has no experience of what it means to be the number of letters, the LGBTQ plus da person, and this person could still be a wonderful dancer or performer. Um, but that person would, well, this is kind of asked backwards, would that person have been what you were looking for, or did the person have a certain experience in life, or
Yeah, no, I don't think I think that way. Like I'm not screening people based on that. Like I think I'm just, I mean, I'm in a world that looks like that, and so that's the world that's in the piece, right? So that doesn't feel like I'm like I need to know like, well, did you go through this experience? And like that's not, for me, it's like I felt drawn to these people, and then I asked to speak with them individually, or we came together, and it's just a conversation. And then I just sense I start to understand things through the conversation about who they are. And then like, yeah, like actually like Justin, I now remember Justin was also in another project of mine called Sueño. And I loved how they worked in that process. And then, Jay had been in a workshop of mine once, and I really loved what they were doing there. So it's like, there's ways like echoes of things and that intrigue me or that just kind of stay with me. And I don't understand why those people versus someone else, right? So I don't know, Sometimes
Mhm.
people will write me and be like, "Oh, I really want to work with you." I'm like, "Oh, yeah, that's so flattering, but you're not in my brain yet. Like you're not in my imagination." And it's no through fault of it's not through any fault of theirs. It's just like I can't control. It's a weird biorhythmic thing for me.
Do you
Suddenly
have any
I feel like
desire to have uh, a repertory situation wherein the works are crafted and they could be sent out with well-crafted casting and so on? Or is each work is an own experiment? You said each work is different. What about the idea of a repertory, the reproduction of work as an
yeah,
idea?
I've definitely made pieces where people had to step in for other people. It's never been so precious that that couldn't happen. It changes for sure, but I think the imprint of that first performer always is still really there. It hasn't been like the only piece I've had where it's been like multiple generations of difference is the piece I made for Ballet de Lorraine, which is a company in France,
Yes, I saw that on tape. It was
yeah,
wild.
it's
Yeah.
wild. And that piece, was made in 2017 and it was performed as recently as last year. So like over half of the original dancers are no longer in the piece. So it's been retaught and, but there was a rehearsal director there. I mean, she's incredible. She did incredible notes. So like that's not something that would happen every time. And usually they bring me in for some rehearsing before they do the show. So that makes it possible. I don't know. The jury's out for me with that. Because again, I feel like the work is not just the moves. It has to be about the conversation. I
Mm-hmm.
really like, and I like once I'm having a different conversation with different people, then I want to make a different thing. I don't,
Mm.
I don't want to just replicate the thing I already made. Doesn't
No,
that?
I understand. I understand. So here's a question. Uh, your audience, do you have an ideal audience? I have here, what is the gender and race of your ideal audience? But I won't put those words on it. I long to have more people of color in the audience at New York Live Arts. I long to.
Sure.
For some reason, and people are not adventurous in the same way. And I find that even the downtown audience, people come to see people they know and they
Sure.
have an affinity. And oftentimes, you can be sure that unless it's a Black person making the work, you're probably not going to have a lot of Black people in the audience, which is not a sin. But
Yeah.
are you concerned about that, considering the mission, the thing that you're pushing against in this?
I think about it a lot, but I also understand why a large demographic of people wouldn't necessarily want to like go onto the train to Manhattan and to Chelsea and may not feel very welcome there. There are a lot of people I know, a lot of young artists I know who feel very unwelcome in Manhattan, period. They feel that that's just the playground of the rich, full stop. And I don't argue with that necessarily because I'm like, you know, they've seen the proof of that, right? They see the sort of way in which that is playing out in the rents, in the
Mm-hmm.
cost of living, and in the people they see on the street. So why should they necessarily why do theaters expect those people to come to them and rather than the theaters go to the people, right? It's like it's kind of a little bit like you have to think about the reality of the community where you are. So yeah, I'm aware that a lot of times because of the nature of the work and because of the institutions that have kind of traditionally shown the work, that it sometimes by default means you're going to have a certain kind of audience, and you have to do some work. And I think
This was my problem with the avant-garde, and I know it's no. This is my problem in general when we merged. That I felt that there was a blind spot. That this
yeah,
was a group of people. Now, having come through the '60s, and believe me, I know something of what I'm speaking.
oh, I'm
That
sure.
people they thought that we were the revolution. We
Yeah.
got it all right, and therefore where we are is cool. I
Yeah.
thought that the dance world was in a kind of a smug silo,
Hmm.
and they didn't know they were not going out to anybody. They were not
I
going.
see it that way, Bill. I don't know that I share that feeling. I don't think Smug Silo is so much the case for me as like you know, what I do and a lot of the people my peers do is specific. And so we know it's not necessarily going to appeal to the masses and a lot of times we are constructing experiences and environments to affirm the reality of our own imaginations and the strangeness of our lives that are not reflected to us in other places and in other ways. And so I think that uh, uh, I think that sometimes sometimes I'm like, it's fine to be small. Like it's not necessarily inherently bad to be small. That's different than being inaccessible.
Well,
Um,
now, I'm not saying size. I'm just saying the constituencies,
yeah,
what the life experience and what the bodies are like watching this work. And yeah, so no, I only have 100. We only have 184 seats at New York Live
yeah,
Arts. It should. It seems to me that that is not. I'm not asking for a sold out show at the New York State Theater.
yeah.
I'm asking for an enlivened, focused, and ethnically varied group of people coming to understand this. That seems to be a heavy lift in
I think it is a heavy lift, but I think it goes beyond just what an individual theater can accomplish, right? Because you're speaking about art education, you're speaking about education in general, you're speaking about class, you're speaking
mm-hmm.
about access, you who has the time at a certain time, who doesn't have to go to work at 6 a.m. the next day, who can afford a $25 ticket, who can afford a
Mm-hmm.
$30 ticket. I know those are low prices and they're much less than what the thing actually costs, but for a lot of people, it's just prohibitive. Like, more than $5 is prohibitive for tons of
So you're
people.
saying now you're taking me on. You're saying people of color, the Latinx, the Black person who lives not in this neighborhood, who maybe has never seen this type of work before, and who would label it white kid art, white people art. Those people, you understand their reluctance. I don't. I feel like I have not found the correct approach, the funding, the that to be mobile enough. Back years ago, there used to be in Harlem, the Jazzmobile.
Yeah.
Literally, you're going to move to neighborhoods, like that. We have the James Baldwin School, the street over from us, right? And to get those kids to come and be curious, anyway, they're practically free just to be in the audience. That you're right. There is a lot of elements. I don't want to keep you too much longer. Um, how are you feeling as a person at this time?
Oh God. Next question. No, very anxious, very upset by so many things, but also very like grateful for the things I'm able to do and the people I'm able to interact with. So it's a double.
Well, good.
Yeah.
You're feeling replete. And how do you feel about the future?
Not super hopeful.
Hmm.
No. I mean, I think I really try to keep my sense of um I try to work sort of very aware of what's close to me and how I'm participating in the ecosystem of what's close to me and what I can actually do and affect and who I can be with. And sometimes it's as simple as like spending time with people I care about. Um, in terms of the broader scale, like what's happening in the world, I feel like it's pretty bad and it's
Yeah.
getting better. Um,
Hmm.
and it may not get better. I don't have like an inherent like everything will get better or the arc of history bends towards justice. Maybe in some ways, sure. Like 100 years ago, even the room, you're given your frustrations and I understand them. I can often feel them too about the audience. I'm like, yeah, but 100 years ago, the audience didn't look like this, right? It's like
No, it's
there
true.
there have been shifts that we can't necessarily appreciate in the lifespan of our lives, right, or the time span of our lives. But it's pretty rough out there,
Hmm.
I mean, war, inequity, injustice, the fall of empire, potentially, hopefully.
So
The
I could bring a young person who is on the cusp of cynicism, I'll say, and I'll say, I want you to go see a place where really serious people are making something we call art, dance art. And I could trust your work with a heart that needs to be made more hopeful.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I mean, I won't say that my work doesn't offer hope, but it offers sustenance. But I don't believe that hope is necessarily like mutually exclusive from despair.
Oh,
Like
really?
I think that these things are woven together now. Like I think that like I have to make my decisions on the day to day to like stay alive and to be with the people that I care about. But right beneath the surface is a tremendous level of despair and
Mhm,
anger
mhm,
and grief. How could it not be there? Come on, like you'd have to be just completely not knowing or sensitive to what's going on in the world to feel that way. I think a lot of us, and I think it's the American way often to assume that hope means like the absence of discomfort. And I think
mhm.
like that's really naive. You know,
Mhm,
like you can work towards justice and also know that it may not happen in your lifetime. You know,
mhm,
I love this about like the Jewish wedding ritual. It's like you get married and then the first thing is you break a glass because it's like, yes, we're enjoying this, but also there's pain. You know, like it doesn't disappear because there is joy. Maybe it's highlighted because of the pain. I don't know. You know, I can't. I think it's like putting too much on art also to think that it can fix everything.
mhm.
Like I
Well,
think
this is my last question for you. Do you want to take you could pass on this one. What do you think of the future of our art form?
I mean it looks good to me partly because I work at a university where I get to work with young people and I love what they do. And I love their excitement for it. And so sometimes when I'm feeling bitter, I just like vampirically feed off their excitement.
I think that's a good survival strategy.
No, it's like get yourself around like nicer younger people. That's for sure.
Right.
That definitely helps.
Mhm. Anyways, Miguel, you are a pleasure to speak to, and we're so pleased to have you in our house.
So
But we're very, very pleased to have you in this world.
thank
And
you. I really appreciate it.
we look forward to we have to embrace you and lean on you. And I hope that you're getting everything you need to keep
Thank you.
going.
Oh,
So
absolutely.